informal ministerial for Ministers of Development. First of all, we're going to be hearing from the Minister of Foreign Affairs of France, Jean-Yves Le Drian, and he's going to tell us about the contents of the discussions today and then take some questions. And first then, Mr. High Representative, you have the floor. Over to you.
Good afternoon. We're gathered today in Montpellier on the occasion of the meeting of the European ministers in charge of development. And please allow me to thank France as well as Minister Jean-Yves Le Drian, my friend, for their hospitality. The meeting's been dominated by Russia's invasion of Ukraine, which generated a huge humanitarian problem. Russia continues with its offensive in Ukraine, and there is a growing number of civilians being killed day after day. And we are in a process of systematic destruction of infrastructure, not just military infrastructure, but as well civil infrastructure. Housing, civil infrastructure, all of them targeted systematically. Of course, the number of refugees can only grow, those refugees crossing the borders of Europe. We have seen already more than 1.5 million, almost 1.6 million refugees arriving in Europe. And we very much fear that there might be 5 million refugees in Europe. And this is a reasonable estimate. This is unprecedented since the Second World War in terms of refugee flow happening so quickly. This huge number of people fleeing their country, fleeing the war, they will have to be received, hosted by the European Union. According to some estimates, more than 18 million people will be impacted by the conflict inside Ukraine. We talked about the response to this situation and identified, first of all, the first payment of almost 100 million euros for an immediate humanitarian aid to our partners in Ukraine and in Moldova. This aid will contribute to providing water, food, shelter, basic needs of these citizens. In this context, we will also strengthen the resilience of both Ukraine and Moldova. And Moldova, in particular, is a country that feels threatened and needs both an economic aid and political assistance as well. We will also quickly work to mobilize a package of 500 million euros for Ukraine. It's been announced by the President of the European Commission in order to help the people impacted by the conflict. Of course, we also will have to continue to support Ukraine in terms of cybersecurity, but what matters at the moment is to help the flow of refugees and continue to work to try and obtain a ceasefire that can allow the beginning of the negotiations. Our meeting was attended by the European Investment Bank that decided to reallocate some 668 million euros in order to support the liquidity of the Ukrainian economy. This is what I had to say regarding the conflict in Ukraine. We also talked about a structural issue, which is the geopolitical dimension of Europe. We need, to a large extent, we need Europe to be more geopolitical, including in the way we design and manage cooperation and development. We need clarity, we need unity, we need firmness, and we need credibility. We need to walk away from this logic of grand announcements and move on to concrete and realistic offers that can be taken seriously by our partners and that are likely to make a difference. Of course, we all want a geopolitical Europe, but how? First of all, we need to be more assertive and more determined in defending our values and our interests. And the Ukrainian crisis very much sped up our positioning and reflection on how to position ourselves to make sure that we are a focal point. And if you look at the way a number of countries reacted within the United Nations and how we voted together, this is very telling. Over lunch, we also talked about something we do not talk about sufficiently, that is biodiversity. We talk a great deal about climate change, but we do not talk much about the loss of biodiversity. And we had an opportunity to talk about it with the former president of Niger, Mr. Issoufou, who was a student in Montpellier. And we talked with him about how to include biodiversity in our development policies, as well as about the contribution of the European Union to agricultural research in Africa. I do understand that these issues might look secondary, given that we all at the moment are following what is happening in Ukraine, but these issues are not secondary. Of course, they're not as urgent and as terrible as what is happening in Ukraine, but the loss of biodiversity is a global and cross-cutting issue, which is relevant to all of us, and it is an issue for the long run. So we therefore need to deal with it, work on it, because the loss of biodiversity is a huge threat for sustainable development and for the ultimate goal, that is to eradicate poverty. It's been a fascinating discussion, but I do understand that today the focus is on Ukraine, and this is the reason why we added it to our agenda. Once again, thank you to France for hosting this meeting. Thank you to Montpellier for their hospitality. Mr. Minister, you have the floor.
Just a couple of words to add what we've heard from the High Representative for Foreign Affairs. I agree with his summary, and it's been a pleasure for France to organize this informal ministerial here in Montpellier. And I want to thank Mr. Mayor for his support, the city of Montpellier for ensuring that this informal meeting could go ahead in such excellent conditions. So thank you very, very much to the Prefecture for all of your services and the work that they have done to support us. Thank you for holding this this meeting. It is ministerial, but it is informal. And when we say an informal ministerial, it means it's more about the nature of the decisions taken. We wanted it to be in Montpellier because recently it held the France-Africa summit last year. And also, when it comes to development, here in Montpellier, there's a whole tradition for innovation, for research, and work with the CIRAD on one hand and CGIAR on the other hand, as well well as all of the agroecology issues that are being developed. This is kind of an agroecological hub or cluster here in Montpellier, and that I think has always been in the background as we discussed it. And today, I just wanted to say to you, Mr. Mayor, the third issue that we discussed with President Issoufou about when we discussed the Great Green Wall, which is a massive agroecological project covering 11 countries in the Sahel, which is currently being financed up to like 16 billion euros worth of investment. And I think this says it all. It was very poignant to be able to say, right, this project extending from Senegal to Djibouti really does highlight a whole new stage of history for the Sahel, which will enable the people living there to revive agriculture. And President Issoufou came back to talk about this. He was there for all of us, all 27 of us, but I think it was really useful to have his input there. But I personally had not known, and several others weren't there, but he actually did his studies here in Montpellier, and here he is, 46 years down the track, coming back to give this very moving talk to us all. Now, before coming back onto the issue of Ukraine and the geopolitical issues, I just think I can't help but reiterate, and I think Mr. Borrell would have the same opinion as me, that the geopolitical aspects of development, I think, really do need to take up their full place. We are the biggest ODA donor. Team Europe, that's Europe plus its member states, and we don't say it. We're bigger than China, bigger than the US in terms of ODA, and we work all around the world, not only in Africa, but we just don't say it loudly and proudly because we've always had this lack of readability about what we're up to. I think today we actually really decided to affirm who we are. We are a major partner, and I think now, given the competition on the influence marketplace out there, obviously we've seen that in different places around the world. We've seen it in the vote in the US, but I think it's time for us to make sure that development is actually a partnership-based tool, so that the countries with which we work do not see their sovereignty undermined. We see them as being true partners, be it for anti-global warming, for biodiversity or sustainable development. I think that was really the conviction that came out of this morning's meeting, this conviction that Europe now stands as a development powerhouse, and I think we're moving away from a model which creates a dependence. We're now looking at development as a different kind of priority. Obviously, we discussed Ukraine as well, and the tragedy that is unfolding before us. We are far from the end of it. And with the financial mobilization that, apart from what Josep Borrell was mentioning, in terms of humanitarian aid, with the 500 million euros that's all been announced, and France is contributing as well, because at the behest of the president, we've already announced 100 million euros for displaced people and refugees, those who are displaced within Ukraine as well. We also want to lend them support, and we have and you talked about 1.2 billion a moment ago, and France has also mobilized 300 million euros. But all of this, remember, is just the start of what could be a very long situation, because ultimately what we're looking at is the abnegation of Ukraine and its dignity. And so that is why the fact that Ukraine was caught in this as a kind of pawn of negotiation by President Putin. These are negotiations of submission, and we feel that this is absolutely unacceptable. And that is why, during today's meeting, we reaffirmed our full support and solidarity with Ukraine. What has really struck me, and I was able to mention this in several other fora recently, what has struck me is firstly that the European Union has been united in its response, whereas President Putin expected us to be divided. We were united, we were swift, and we have been strong, even audacious in our support. Remember, Europe has changed even in the last 10 days, both in terms of qualitative pattern, how we can support Ukraine with military wherewithal, with the massive sanctions that have been decided and implemented, whether this, despite the fact that this is all happening in this context, the fact that refugees in just a few hours could be reassured of protection, even though sometimes these processes, as we know, can be rather lengthy and cumbersome. Here, what we were able to do was that in the face of the violence of the aggression against Ukraine by Russia, it actually stimulated the EU to take this swift decision. And that is why I can say that it has changed. It's not the same EU as we were 10 days ago. And I think at the Thursday and Friday's summit, at the behest of Emmanuel Macron, I think will demonstrate this even more. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now let's move to the Q&A. And the very first question is for Patrick Tegereau from RTL.
On passe aux questions. Donc,
oui, bonjour,
RTL,
messieurs. Oui, bonjour, messieurs. Juste...
Good afternoon, sirs. What is, according to you, the role that China can play in the current situation? We hear that China could operate as an intermediate. What do you think of it? Well, in the course of our meeting, I had to leave for a moment to have a discussion with the Chinese minister. I do not think that this is about mediation, but it is obvious that China has some influence over Russia. So we talked about the situation as it stands. Its background, the possible developments in the future, and I've asked China to use all of its influence in the potential diplomatic initiatives to support the possibility of a ceasefire, and so that some proper negotiations take place. It is clear that China can play a role, not as a mediator, as I said, because it is clear that China is much closer to Russia's stance. But yes, they can play a role, have an influence. Given that China is always a major global power, and we are well aware of their friendship, their connections with Russia, so they can play a crucial role, if they so wish, in favor of a diplomatic solution to the crisis.
Yes.
I share these views. President Macron will be talking to President Xi tomorrow, if the timing is still the same, to tell the Chinese president, or to explain that China has some responsibilities as a member of the Security Council. China has responsibilities regarding the developments of the conflicts around the world. And, of course, there is this bond, as we've seen on the 4th of March, between President Putin and President Xi. So China has responsibilities because it can indeed exert pressure on Russia. And the fact that China abstained at the Security Council is a sign that there is no such thing as a total alignment between the positions of Russia and China. So I believe that China, as a major power, a great country, can use its influence over Russia to prevent the wars from continuing. We will now take a question from Vince Chadwick on Zoom.
Hello, thank you for taking the question. My question is to Minister Le Drian about the Cotonou Agreement.
Can you hold on?
You can hear me? Yeah. I wanted to ask why it has not been signed. Sinon, je pose la question en français, si vous voulez.
Oui, si vous préférez.
Oui, ok. On m'a dit que je fais en anglais.
Vous n'avez pas mon...
Désolé.
You can speak in English.
Pourquoi c'est toujours pas signé?
Why are the post-Cotonou agreements not signed yet? What's the partnership for if we have to go months and months without a signed agreement so that the European Commission and its member states don't take action? Is it because this agreement is no longer very worthwhile, given that you've had the EU-AU agreement? What does this mean for the partnership with these countries? The European Commission has tried to reach out to countries of the international community, but this didn't actually mean that it was successful in ensuring that France was at the head of the FAO. So I just want to know, where are the post-Cotonou Agreements Acts?
Well, it is fundamental. It's been the object of lengthy discussions and allowed us to have a document which is not just an African document, and I hope we can sign it during the French presidency of the EU. Now the next question is for Juliette Rabin, AFP.
Yes. Bonjour.
Good afternoon. Yes, I wanted to know what developments we could expect when it comes to opening humanitarian corridors. Apparently, this was a subject of the. It's going to be a subject of the upcoming discussions between Russia and Ukraine. So, how do you see the situation in terms of humanitarian corridors? Well, I had the opportunity yesterday to discuss, when I saw the developments in the military situation, that we were moving into a very difficult phase, and that is the phase of sieges. Siege at Kharkiv, Mariupol, it's already underway. But there's been such strong resistance on the part of the Ukrainians that these sieges have not yet been successful. But maybe tomorrow what we're looking at is a siege of Kiev. With the sieges initiated by the Russian armed forces, we have unfortunately seen that they have a deadly experience. It was in Aleppo when we last saw the strategy used, and it was incessantly the same scenario. In other words, we really are reliving what we saw: bombardment, and then a proposal for a humanitarian corridor that is made, then and denunciation by the adversary of the rupture of those corridors, and yet that it was actually the fault of the person who delineated the corridor itself, and then the proposal to parley. And then this leads to another phase of discussions, another phase of bombardment, and we saw this in Aleppo. That's exactly how it was. If you look at Grozny in Chechnya, that's exactly what happened, and unfortunately, now we are looking at the same scenario. Let's not fall into traps. There is a principle, and that is free humanitarian aid access everywhere. That is the principle. And humanitarian access also exists in international humanitarian law. This is the principle that needs to be respected, and that is the principle that we are not seeing respected currently. And so This concept of the humanitarian corridors, unfortunately, I want it to be a reality. Even in the Russian military academies, there are no courses outlining this strategy of proposal corridor bombardment, proposal corridor.
Va vers une Syrie.
Yes, I think we're looking at a Syriazation, if I could say so, of Ukraine. This brings our press conference to a close. I want to thank you very, very much. Mr. Minister, High Representative, I wish everyone a good afternoon. Thank you. Thank you very much.